Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I will be speaking to the converted, or to the power. To the choir, rather, because most of you understand the concept of soft power probably better than I do. Maybe for starters, those that have had the chance to visit Washington, D.C., you will not leave the city without being taken to the White House, Lincoln Memorial, the Congress, and also the Martin Luther King Memorial. And that happens for a reason that I'll be talking about later. And then some of us have benefited from scholarships, maybe by Fulbright, IREX I was talking about. And we have seen in our countries nice gardens called the Chinese gardens. And we have also seen theaters known as the French cultural centers. And that happens for a reason. Probably that's what we'll be talking about also. Thank you.
With this, you make the next. Yes, yes. No, it's use this. So you have the hands free.
So I want to say what I'll be talking about is what I think, and not the institution that I work for. And it's work in progress also towards my interest in soft power as a concept as I pursue cultural diplomacy as a career. But I would also want to say I know there are a lot of things that people can talk about in terms of soft power, in terms of whether it's good or turns other countries into puppets. But my focus is on soft power through foreign aid and how that helps in making some countries, transition from being autocratic regimes to some form of democratic regimes. It might be something that is depends on the conditions that have been set, but at the end of the day, it's about, do we in the end see democracy in those countries, or it doesn't bring anything worth mentioning at all. So the concept of foreign aid, we all know it. When you look at the slide, it's talking about Chinese aid. China aid says for shared future. So it means China is saying it's not for us only, but everybody else. And the UK says from the British people. This is money coming from British taxpayers. So it's the British people that are thinking about people that are affected by disasters, people that are facing hunger. So these are just some form of narratives which are making these countries kind of deliver their message to kind of get the emotional, connection with their target societies. It's very sometimes difficult when the people you are quoting is right there. So Mark Donfry talks about soft power coming in form of a sequence where you need to have to define the context. You also need to identify the vehicle. You also need to know the target and why that target, and how the message is going to be constructed so that you get to what you want. In this thinking, I'll be looking at the Millennium Challenge account as one of those vehicles that the United States of America is using to make sure that their message goes to the intended audience. Not only that, but also to have that attraction. Sometimes when you are, not from experience, but from what I think happens, sometimes when you meet a fair lady, and then just go like, you have to say yes or no to my proposal. It may not work. But now I'm going to take you out for dinner, I can do this, I can do this. That kind of brings the bond between you. And that's what soft power does. So soft power, in this case, I'm looking at a situation where there could be support that is given to another country or a community, and in the process, you get the good country effect or the good country reputation. And this is also proposed by Simon Anholt in the national branding. And some of you, I think, know what I'm talking about. But then, much as we could be talking about aid as a way of bringing about, you know, affinity towards another country, for example, or a group, we need to look at the inception of the Millennium Challenge account. Most of the times, you know, in the US politics, Republicans and Democrats do not really agree on issues. But if there is one bill that really got enormous, this great support from both the Republicans and the Democrats was the Millennium Challenge Bill that became an act in 2003. They all voted for it. And that was during the time of George Bush. So this is some form of funding arrangement which is autonomous and is being taken away from the Department of State's Treasury or even the conventional U.S. donor, USAID channel, which we call USAID. 37 compacts so far, and Malawi, 37 compacts targeting 29 countries, and Malawi is one of the beneficiaries. This can be terminated at any time. It can be withdrawn. It can be terminated. It can also be, you know, they could sometimes just say, we're not giving you a lot of money because of what you're doing. And most interestingly, you find Section 611 of the Millennium Challenge Act of 2003, which says, after consultation with MCC's board of directors, the CEO may suspend or terminate assistance in whole or in part if the CEO determines that, number one, the country or other entity receiving MCC aid is engaged in activities which are contrary to the national security interests of the United States. Let's take note of this one. And the second one says, the national security of the United States. So I just want us to take note of that one. And the second one is that if the country or entity has engaged in a pattern of actions inconsistent with the criteria used to determine the eligibility, I'll also be talking about that later. And then the country or entity has failed to adhere to its responsibilities under its compact. I've already talked about who should host, and then we're saying, no, we're taking it from USAID and other entities. So the focus of MCC has been supporting education, water and sanitation, irrigation, agriculture, roads, power, as well as ports. Could this be concrete diplomacy? I don't know. We can talk about that one later. But this is the major area of focus. Tangible thing that people can see to say, okay, here is something that was built by the Americans. So the process is there's candidate country identification, eligibility criteria formulation, compact and threshold countries selected, programs development and proposal, approval and funding. I'll be explaining the terms like what is a threshold program and what is a compact program. So there are expectations from both ends. So the MICC is expecting the following from countries that it is going to support within the this compact. Number one is that the countries that are applying for the funds should make sure that in those countries there's civil society involvement in developing the program itself. Number two, emphasis will be on good governance, transparency, human rights, rule of law. At the same time, rewards based on past performance objectives. So if you qualified for the first compact, for you to qualify for the second one, you have to demonstrate that you really did well. The impact from your previous compact contributes to whether you're going to get funds or not. At the same time, we have expectations from those that are getting the money. That include programs developed by qualifying countries. So this is like a demand-driven kind of approach, not where somebody just says, we feel you guys need this money, so we're giving you that. So it's not from the needs approach, but it's coming from a kind of empowerment where you have to make decisions based on what you think you need in that particular country. At the same time, it is hands-off of the U.S. strategic foreign policy. I already said that this is an autonomous institution, and many more other examples, as you can see there. So like I said, the focus is ruling justly. If they see that you don't tick the boxes in terms of good governance, you will not get the fund. Number two, investing in people, healthcare, education, and other opportunities, promoting an educated and healthy population. Number three is economic freedom, that these countries should later on become economically independent. So in Malawi, we have had our good share of the Millennium Challenge cooperation. But maybe let me tell you a little bit of something about this country we are calling Malawi here. So Malawi's total public debt stock as at January this year was at $6.18 billion, which is 54% of the country's GDP. You could also tell how small the economy is. And 3.5 billion is domestic debt. This is money that you get from local banks, could be commercial banks and other forms of resources. And then 2.68 is external debt. And the major institution that are giving Malawi that money is the FDB, the African Development Bank, the World Bank through International Development Association, Export-Import Bank of China. And we also have, I think we know when we talk about concessional loans as well as commercial loans. So commercial loans basically are those that you get from commercial entities, and usually they have high interest rates and shorter repayment period, like BlackRock, for example. But the concessional loans are those that you get from development banks, and sometimes they'll give you a long time. Even the time for you to start repaying is not as short. A bit of the country profile demographically and few other indicators. Literacy at 62%, population approximately 20 million, a size in area 108,000 square km, human HDX at 0.483, life expectancy 6.4, corruption perception index, the CPI, 35 points, and it has really risen in the past few years from 66 points. And it is now at 113 out of 180 countries in terms of corruption perception. And the factors that have led to this improvement. And these are very key factors that will determine whether you should get the support or not. So Malawi has had 3 so far. The first one was the Threshold program that started in September 2004. So the threshold program is not the main program. This comes when they see that maybe you are not ticking the boxes in terms of the governance or the, for instance, there are 17 pieces within the checklist that you need to pass, but maybe I've just passed 4, so they cannot give you the contract, the compact, because you will have failed in terms of qualifying for the compact. So they give you some funds to take you through, like establishing yourselves in terms of governance, institutions, the law, and all that stuff. If you do well under this threshold, then you can qualify for the impact. So the first time, Malawi had some challenges in terms of control of corruption, as well as fiscal policy. As a result of that, Malawi could not qualify for the impact, the compact rather, but just some funds to help them to put their house in order. And in 2014, 2018, the poverty reduction through economic growth focusing on energy. And this led to a project that was connecting Malawi to the Southern Africa power pool. At the same time, institutional reforms had to take place, like the unbundling of what was called the Malawi Electricity Commission, into one being responsible for energy generation, another one for transmission, and for transmission. At the same time, there were some form of institutional reforms, like establishment of the Malawi Energy Regulatory Authority. So you can see that the focus is, yes, energy, but not just about let's build a power plant, but also coming up with, systems that are robust, that will be sustainable, even after the end of the program itself. And then, because of the good performance of the country under the Malawi Compact, Malawi also got the Malawi Transport and Land Compact. This was signed in 2022, 350 million. And the major focus was accelerated growth corridors. So this is focusing on building road infrastructure. It could be other forms of transportation that makes the hard-to-reach areas also have access to where markets are. So that's why they're calling it accelerated growth corridors. At the same time, we have subsets within that. The first one is American Catalyst Facility for Development, which kind of provides a conducive environment for foreign direct investment. At the same time, other financiers coming in to also maybe under the public-private partnership and other forms of investment. Then we also have the International Development Finance Corporation and the Land Productivity Project, which focuses largely on agriculture. So the three, beginning from the threshold to where we are today, especially the threshold, this is where my focus is now. We saw the rearrangement and alignment of public programs that have proved sustainable. The first one is the passing of the anti-money laundering law and the plea bargaining provision under the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Code of our laws. This was not there in the past. And then the establishment of the Integrated Financial Management Information Systems, which means that if I am doing procurement within public service, somebody else somewhere should be able to tell where this money went to and how much went out and how much was. So it's like some form of a hub where all government finances are being monitored from one source. Then we also had the establishment of the Department of Public Procurement. I've already talked about anti-money laundering, but this also involved some form of combating financing of terrorism. And then we have the assets declaration by senior public officers. Every senior officer in Malawi, I'm not senior, of course, but as long as I work for the government, I have to declare what I have at the time I'm getting into the office, and every year this should be updated. So using the there is a term like social is it social life audit, something like that. They should be able to say this guy just gets $5,000 in a year. How come he's driving a Ferrari, a Lamborghini? So that kind of also helps to check you. And then we also had the establishment of the Financial Intelligence Unit. So if you look at all these as structural elements, software, though, under the influence of the Millennium Challenge Account, under the Malawi Threshold Program, like the foundational program, it helps to have Malawi significantly rise in terms of the corruption perception index. And once you pass this critical phase, there is a big chance you could get the compact. So after this one, the next was the compact that I talked about, focusing on energy, and those other institutions also being put in place. So every year, the US government, you can get this information from the US Gov. There is what is known as the Annual Human Rights Report. And if you don't score very well in this area, they can as well terminate the MCC part. And then we have so this report also talks about for instance, the Article 19, freedom of expression and other things, assembly rights, as well as protection of human rights defenders. I remember in 2019, Malawi government was in trouble because 3 human rights defenders were arrested, and we had big issues to do with people with albinism, and sometimes people just being arbitrarily arrested and all that stuff. And the US government issued statements, like serious statements, that led to the release unconditionally of the human rights defenders, and they continued to do their work. Because the threat was, you know what, guys, if you stick to what you're doing, we're getting back our money. And that's the reason I took you guys to the demographic profile of the country. You look at the level of poverty, and this is a country that for it to finance its annual budget, I think it requires about 40% budgetary support to take care of the deficit that is there. So the withdrawal, and it was happening after what we used to call the CAB's common approach for budgetary support had already withdrawn their support due to the same issue. So this was going to be a very big issue, and government was forced that time to release the human rights defenders. So where does the soft power influence come from? It's because the MCC, based on the conditions that come with it for you to get the money, is considered by the civil society organizations, the private sector, and politicians as well as a good model, because it doesn't just say get the money, but they say we're going to give you the money if you prove to us that your governance system is good. So it has definitely, and it pushes the countries, compliance with fundamental governance principles. This has built the emotional reputation of the United States in Malawi. Actually, one minister said, we need friends like the United States. So, yeah, this is what I was talking about. So, this paper agrees that MCC is a form of soft power, American soft power. At the same time, I agree that MCC is influencing American governance values. But what are these values? Bad values or good values? You see that we have seen improvements in some regimes in Africa because of the conditions or the threats that the US government sometimes puts in place. Like, there was a time in Malawi when the director of the Anti-Corruption Bureau was targeting some of the big shots in government, but the US government said, you know what? Okay, so she was arrested because she was, I think, touching difficult areas. But the US government issued a statement. The embassy said, you know what? If you dare keep this lady in jail, we might reconsider our support. And the director of ACB was immediately released. So that also shows that it can also help to push a country into a more democratic country. And so, yeah, what I'm trying to say in this is that it promotes democratic values, people-centered governance, sustainable, demand-driven, human rights-based, and it has multiple effects such as trust in government and reduced unrest. Because sometimes, you know, when people see that there's too much corruption, the funds are just being stolen, like the Transparency International report said 30% of resources in the past were being stolen. So that was huge, and it led to some form of civil unrest in the country. But if you have governments under duress, of course, performing, becoming more accountable and more transparent, earning the trust of people, it might have such a multiplier effect. So this is where I end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's take questions and comments. I'm sure we've inspired some of our fellow classmates or other participants. Who would like to go first? Yes. Okay.
Hey, Happy. Thank you very much. It was very informative, amazing, and I can't really see you now. I indeed, find out many things for myself which I've never heard about, so thank you for that. And my question is, I'd say it's about foreign policies as well. So you mentioned that there are certain things that are needed to be done in order to get an access, sort of, right, to the MCC program. Does it also somehow reflects on the foreign policy of the country? So, for example, the way how it treats its neighbors, or overall, I'd say, external politics in the game of the whole world. Does it relate, or it doesn't have to do anything about that?
I'll give a very good example of 2 weeks ago, last month, I think, when, and that was really bizarre for me, the Malawi delegation went to Russia. And then there was something like Russia was saying we can support Malawi in terms of building its energy capacity. And the US issued a statement and said, hey, we are watching you. Stop dealing with Russia. You better stick with us or China. So that's a very good example of what you're talking about. So it really reflects on the country's foreign policy. I'm not saying I know we voted against the war in Ukraine, but that was something just like what Ghana said earlier on. That is something to do with what we believe in, you know, territorial integrity and that stuff. So it was not because of the Western forces, telling us to do so. But I think what happened it's there in the media, you can check, by saying, hey, we are warning you, don't get into these, development, collaborations with Russia, but stick to us or China. I think that was an issue. You might have also seen that the MCC, there was a very contentious issue in Nepal, I think some few years ago, where in Parliament, they could not pass it. You know? Some of the gray areas that they needed to thrash out. The Parliament said, no. And then China was all over in the Chinese media. Nepal has rejected MCC, and USA was saying, hey, make sure you sign as quickly as possible, or we're withdrawing everything. So it really has a bearing on how sometimes foreign policies of these countries are shaped. This is my view, not of the government, but looking at the foreign policies, sometimes you can see that. And especially that most of the developing countries today, their foreign policy is modeled on what is called economic diplomacy. So these issues that could bring into tatters socioeconomic indicators, they really become a big issue. So yes, it has. Yeah.
Yes. Someone bring the microphone to the left. Yeah.
Thank you for that presentation. Firstly, a comment, then a question. The comment you mentioned when you are talking about Power and Electricity Supply Commission of Malawi and then the Malawi Energy Regulator Authority, I'll just comment on that because I was part of what happened, the transition that happened. Malawi used to have single sector regulators. So there was a regulator for electricity, a regulator for gas and oil, then other regulators. So it was required to move into a multi-sector regulatory framework where these different regulators came together as Malawi Energy Regulator Authority, regulating electricity, oil and gas, as well as renewable energy, now solar power, under the same roof. So that's the comment. The question, in about the same period that the compact was happening, you may recall that there was an issue. You have talked about the conditions. There was an issue about same-sex marriage in Malawi. People were testing the waters, so to speak. And perhaps the first, if not the only time that the UN Secretary General stepped foot on the soil of Malawi was when this was a hot issue. And my question is, where do you see that going with respect to this compacts or the Millennium Challenge accounts for Malawi, given that there's still a lot of resistance and internal pressure not to accept these kind of things coming from outside? Thank you.
That's a pretty good question. And by the way, he's the Deputy Ambassador for Malawi mission in Berlin. I hope this will not be part of my appraisal next time you do it. So yeah, it was really contentious, but one thing that Malawi government did, that they were really smart on that issue, because Malawi government took that issue to what we could refer to as Monetarium. I don't know if you understand this term, those that do law, where you say we are going to put this law on, we are going to, it will not be, enforcing it, all right? On hold? Yeah, thank you for that. So since that time, nobody has been prosecuted in Malawi because of their sexual orientation. It was put on hold. And then in 2016, I remember, during the Universal Periodic Review, Malawi accepted. So when you go to the UPR, when you say we have noted, is actually rejection. But you can say accept. So what they did is they tweaked what came, the recommendation within the Universal Periodic Review, to say, okay, we are going to include the LGBTI community in the HIV and AIDS master plan. And they did that, access to health care and other opportunities. But we had cases where nobody actually got to jail. And then during the 2019 campaign, I think you were also following that this question was put there. And one said, you know what, I cannot really say this, but Malawians have to make a decision about this. But some of us that were in human rights that time, we said, you know what, you cannot, you know, subject issues of minority groups to a referendum, because definitely they're going to lose. There are few of them. This is something that requires like some affirmative kind of action from government and stuff. So even the Minister of Justice in 2021, during the current UPR, because it takes about 5 years, I think the phrase is, he said, you know, yeah, we hear what you're saying, but you know, people have to decide. So the answer has always been like, we are going to see what people will say, consultations will take place. So that is one way of running away from that. And the US also, I think, have said, oh yeah, we are looking at, you know, efforts, but you know, the diplomatic language, efforts, but we think you can do more than what you're doing currently. So yeah, that's where we are. But definitely, if we are going to have a lot of people getting, if we're going to have the situation as is the case in Uganda, it might have a bearing on whether Malawi will continue with the program or not. I don't know if that was correct. Okay, thank you.
Is there a final question or comments? So we're running a little over time, but I think it is good if we do maybe at least a 5-minute break, just to give everyone a chance for a cup of coffee or whatever, and then we have 2 keynote speeches left. So that's, if everyone would agree, express our sincere gratitude to Hamid for excellent.